Time stays long enough for anyone who will use it. Leonardo da Vinci. Time is not truly scarce. It is our awareness of it that is impoverished. The feeling of not having enough time rarely stems from reality, but from a fragmented focus and a vague anxiety about the future. When the mind is stretched between regrets of the past and fears of the unknown, the present becomes an abandoned wasteland. The one who truly utilizes time isn't the one who races the clock, but the one who slows down their own mind. They see an hour not as 60 minutes to be filled, but as a living space that can be touched, tasted, and transformed into meaning. Like a painter before a blank canvas, it isn't the canvas that decides the value, but how he places every single brushstroke. Time is the same. It is invisible, but when passed through intentional consciousness, it becomes memory, skill, and identity. Remove the pressure of "it's already too late," a limiting belief that shackles people to procrastination. When we realize there is still enough time, we open a door to allow ourselves to begin, to correct, and to reinvent. The energy of life arises from that realization, not from having more time, but from changing how we face it. Time is not an enemy chasing us from behind, but a silent friend waiting to be used wisely. And when we are truly present in every moment, life does not shorten. It is only that we, before, lived it too superficially. From error to error, one discovers the entire truth. Sigmund Freud. A mistake is not a crack in the intellect, but a footprint of growth. Humans do not learn through perfection, but through collision. Each stumble is like a knock on the door of perception, forcing us to open new perspectives. If truth is a complete painting, then mistakes are the raw initial sketches. They may be crooked or messy, but they are the necessary conditions for the final form to emerge. To fear mistakes often live in an illusion of control, where they try to keep everything right from the very beginning. But it is this very closeness that makes perception rigid, like a still water surface that never reflects depth. Conversely, those who dare to be wrong are those who dare to let reality strike against their beliefs. Every mistake, then, is no longer a failure, but a form of feedback, a signal showing what is misaligned between thought and the world. The journey to find the truth is like walking through fog. We cannot see the entire path, but every step in the wrong direction helps us understand the surrounding terrain better. Gradually, from those seemingly lost steps, an invisible map is formed within the mind. And at some point, it is the mistakes themselves that lead us to where we need to be, not by avoiding the truth, but by touching it through every fall. A mistake is not something to be erased, but something to be interpreted. When we learn to read the meaning hidden behind every failure, we don't just move closer to the truth, but we understand ourselves more deeply. A living being that is always learning, always adjusting, and always evolving through imperfection. An ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. Mahatma Gandhi. Knowledge that remains only at the level of awareness is like a map that has never been used, detailed and logical, yet soulless. Only when feet touch the ground of reality, when the body, emotions, and errors participate together, does knowledge begin to live. A small action, however clumsy, carries more weight than 1,000 polished words because it forces us to face the friction of reality, where all illusions of perfection are quickly worn away. Those who only speak often live in the safe zone of theory, where everything can be controlled by words, but action is different. It requires commitment, risk-taking, and more importantly, accepting that one is not yet good enough. At this point, practice becomes a process of restructuring the self. Each time we act, we don't just learn how to do. We learn about our limits, reflexes, and the fears hidden deep within us. That is something no lecture can ever fully convey. A lecture is like light shining into a room, while practice is the act of manually rearranging everything inside. Light can help us see clearly, but if we don't move, if we don't touch the objects, the room remains as chaotic as before. Only when we act does understanding become embodied, turning into a natural reflex instead of an abstract notion. The value of practice lies not in its scale, but in its beginning. One small step is enough to break the inertia of procrastination and open the flow of change. And once started, the truth lies not in what we say, but in what we dare to do, repeat, and persist with until the end. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Confucius. Revenge is not merely an outward action, but a prolonged internal process where memories are replayed, emotions are amplified, and the ego is imprisoned in a single story. I have been hurt. When we nurse the intention of retaliation, we think we are in control, but in reality, we are giving power to the wound itself to control our spiritual life. The 2 graves here aren't just for the enemy and oneself in a physical sense, but are symbols of 2 parallel spiritual deaths. One is the death of tranquility, when the mind is invaded by obsessive thoughts, leaving no room for peace. And the other is the death of the capacity for growth, when life energy is consumed by the past instead of being invested in the future. Revenge, ultimately, is a form of self-imprisonment at the moment of injury, forcing us to keep living in that instant, even though time has moved on. Hatred is like a fire we try to hold to burn someone else, but it is our own hand that is scorched first. The longer we hold it, the more we grow accustomed to the pain, until we mistake it for strength. But true strength lies not in the ability to hurt, but in the ability to let go, not to blindly forgive others, but to liberate oneself from the cycle of negativity. This does not suppress the emotion of anger, a very human reaction, but serves as a warning about where that anger is headed. When we choose revenge, we are digging a deeper pit for our own inner freedom. When we choose to stop, observe, and transform, we don't just avoid 2 graves, we open a different path where we are no longer defined by what caused us pain. My life didn't please me, so I created my life. Coco Chanel. Dissatisfaction is not a sign of failure, but a signal of awakening consciousness, a sense of misalignment between what is and what could be. Many choose to numb that feeling through passive acceptance, like living in a cramped room, but convincing themselves it's all they deserve. But there are others who, when faced with that frustration, choose to break down the walls. Creating my life isn't about changing circumstances instantly, but about shifting from a person defined by circumstances to a person who shapes them. It requires a subtle yet resolute shift from a reactive mindset to a creative one. Like an artist dissatisfied with an unfinished painting, they don't blame the colors or the canvas. They start over with more intentional brushstrokes. We cannot always choose our starting point in life, but we always have the right to choose how we continue. It is the refusal to live by a pre-written script, social expectations, or borrowed definitions of success. When a person decides to self-create, they accept uncertainty, responsibility, and the possibility of failure. But within that space, they find a form of freedom, the freedom to try, to fail, and to become the version they truly desire. Initial dissatisfaction is not a problem to be extinguished, but the raw material for rebirth. When we dare to face it and act from it, life is no longer something that happens to us, but something touched, shaped, and gradually turned into a signature masterpiece, imperfect, but honest and vivid. Life itself is the most wonderful fairy tale. Hans Christian Andersen. What decides a human experience is not just what happens, but how we interpret it. Fairy tales don't exist because the world is perfect, but because the storyteller knows how to see meaning, even in trials. And life is the same. It does not lack darkness, but it is the interweaving of loss and hope that creates the story's depth. We often think fairy tales are places where everything ends happily, but the magic lies in the journey, where the protagonist must travel through the deep forest, face their fears, and often feel as though they cannot go on. If seen through hurried eyes, life is just a sequence of disconnected events, but when looking deeper, every incident is like a chapter, helping to shape who we become. Painful moments are not errors in the narrative, but necessary climaxes for growth to occur. Life is like a book being written day by day. We cannot read the ending in advance, but we have the right to choose how we write every page. Some write with fear, turning everything into a tragedy. Others write with curiosity and courage, turning even difficulties into hidden miracles. When we start to see life as an unfolding story, we stop demanding it be perfect and instead learn to participate in it more fully. The ability to transform chaos into meaning and trials into strength. And when we are awake enough to realize that a fairy tale isn't something to hide in, it is the way we choose to live and feel every moment of our lives. Always cling to the things that make you happy to be alive. Humans are not exhausted by a lack of time or opportunity, but because they gradually lose the ability to feel meaning in small things. When joy is no longer recognized, life becomes a mechanical sequence of days passing by, never touching the inside. Clinging isn't holding on in fear, but a process of selection, nurturing, and returning to the moments that make us truly feel that we exist. It could be a quiet morning, a sincere conversation, or simply the feeling of finishing a small task. But that very simplicity carries a special weight, like underground streams, silently nourishing an entire forest. If we ignore them to chase distant peaks, we easily fall into a state of emptiness, where every achievement loses its flavor. The human mind tends to adapt to grand things very quickly, but it is restored sustainably by small, repeated, and genuine joys. Holding on to what makes us happy to be alive is a way to resist indifference, a form of spiritual numbness that appears when we live too long under pressure or habit. When we actively record and cherish meaningful moments, we are re-establishing the connection with ourselves. It is not an escape from reality, but a way of enriching reality with selective attention. Like a fire, great achievements may be powerful bursts of flame, but it is the small joys that serve as the embers, keeping the fire burning long term. And when we know how to preserve them, we don't just live, we feel deeply that we are living fully and meaningfully. When you are good to others, you are best to yourself. Benjamin Franklin. Every outward action leaves an inward mark. When we are kind, the mind doesn't just record the behavior, it redefines who we are. We become someone of value, capable of creating something positive. Conversely, when we are harsh or indifferent, we don't just hurt others, we silently erode our own self-image, a fracture that's hard to see, but accumulates over time. Kindness is a form of inner reflection. A person treats others well not because the world always deserves it, but because they do not want to lose their own internal state, like a body of water. When we keep it pure, everything reflected is clear. When we muddy it with negativity, we are the ones who can no longer see anything clearly. Treating others well is not a sacrifice, but a strategy to protect our own mental stability. Every act of kindness is like a ripple spreading across a lake. It touches others, but simultaneously returns to the starting point, which is us. The sense of relief after a good deed, the warmth of helping someone, or simply the peace of not having done wrong, all are psychological profits that no material reward can replace. When we choose to be kind, we are not just building a more pleasant environment around us, but also constructing a healthy internal space. And in that space, we don't need to run away from ourselves, because we know that how we live with others is also how we are living with ourselves. Mistakes are part of the dues one pays for a full life. Sophia Loren. A full life is not measured by the avoidance of mistakes, but by the degree to which we dare to live, choose, and take responsibility. Mistakes are like the mandatory cost of stepping out of one's comfort zone, a type of tuition that no one can avoid if they truly want to understand life through experience. Those who try to live perfectly often, inadvertently, live shallowly. They narrow their actions to reduce risk, and as a result, they narrow their capacity to feel. Their lives may be right, but they lack depth, like a song that never dares to hit the high notes for fear of being off-key. Conversely, those who accept mistakes as inevitable open up a much larger living space for themselves. Each fall is not just a loss, but a restructuring of perception, where we are forced to look back at our beliefs, adjust our direction, and better understand our limits. Life is like a mountain journey. If you want to go high, you must accept slipping, choosing the wrong path, or even having to turn back. But it is those experiences that help you read the terrain, feel the incline, and ultimately find the right path. Without mistakes, you might stand safely at the foot of the mountain, but you will also never know the scenery from the peak. The price of a full life isn't about paying a little or a lot, but whether we dare to pay it at all. Mistakes do not make life less valuable. On the contrary, they make it more real, deeper, and more worth living. And when we look back, what made us grow was not what we did right, but how we kept walking after we did wrong. As soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Confusion about how to live doesn't come from a lack of choices, but from a lack of an inner anchor. When we don't trust ourselves, we are forced to borrow direction from the outside, opinions, standards, expectations, like a boat constantly changing course with the wind because it has no compass. The result is that the more we live, the more lost we feel, because every decision doesn't truly belong to us. Self-trust is not blind confidence. It is knowing you might be wrong, but still having the ability to adjust, knowing you aren't perfect, but still being capable enough to move forward. Once this foundation is formed, living is no longer a math problem requiring a correct answer, but becomes a process of flexible experimentation. We are no longer obsessed with choosing the best path, but focus on the act of walking and learning from every step. This shift creates a sense of clarity, not because things become easy, but because we no longer doubt ourselves on the journey. Self-trust is like a root system beneath the earth. It isn't on display, but but it is what keeps the tree standing firm against the wind. When the roots are deep enough, the tree doesn't need to control every gust of wind, nor worry about every change in the weather. Similarly, when we trust ourselves, we don't need to know the entire path in advance. We only need to know we can adapt to whatever happens on the way. Knowing how to live is not about possessing a perfect formula, but about reaching a state where you are no longer entirely dependent on formulas. When we trust ourselves, we allow ourselves to live more actively, flexibly, and authentically. In that state, life is no longer a test to be passed, but a journey we are steady enough to experience and shape for ourselves.